Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the MBA for Executives webinar and all about application tips. My name is Stutsman Marquez, and I serve as the Associate Director of Admissions, and I'm here with my colleague, Assistant Director David Daniel.
Hello.
And in the background, we have our other Assistant Director, Liz Fischio, who's fielding questions throughout this presentation. And we have a great media services team who is basically setting us all up for this. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time today. We are thrilled to be coming to you live from Evans Hall here in New Haven. And to kick off, I want to share with you that our, at least as we start this, for many of you who are in the application process right now, it's very likely that you've heard about the program, the curriculum, learned more about the community. So we're going to share with you at least a high-level overview of the program and the people who comprise it. And then we're going to dive right into the application tips. So to start, we are always going to start with our mission, which is to educate leaders for business and society. And as you know, this is something that runs through our staff, our students, our alumni, our faculty. We really are at the precipice of really doing our best to create opportunities within organizations that will also positively influence and impact the greater society. So all of our students live by that mission and really wish to see that in the world and within their organizations. So here's a beautiful picture of Yale University, a broader campus view. And you can see the residential colleges and just the neo-Gothic architecture. We are so lucky to be a part of this university. It is over 300 years since its establishment, built on the land of the Quinnipiac, and also world-renowned scholars and artists and economists have gone through the training and the education here. We feel incredibly proud of its tradition. And so with that, we want to share with you a little bit about the idea of access. This is a photo of Sterling Library, and for those of you who have not been to New Haven, if you do get a chance, I would absolutely recommend doing a tour of the libraries. They are not only majestic, but also architecturally distinct. This is a representation of the open door to our community of purpose, which we'll speak to you a little bit about later. And so for today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit more about our students. David will share some admissions process and timelines, and then we're going to go through each of the different application components in detail and with some really good tips that you can use as you're wrapping up the application. We know that there's a first round application deadline of October 30th, which is coming right up. We hope to have some time to do a Q&A session, and we'll provide you with some next steps. So as mentioned, we are all very mission driven, and what this translates to is really a thriving community that really is intentional and interested in creating more influence and expansion and building their own capacity through building knowledge, skills, and abilities as they build their business acumen so that they can then influence and have that impact on the greater good. So very engaged and passionate students. So this is not necessarily a transactional group of people here. They're really interested in learning more about each other and building upon that legacy. So our students are mid-career students. They're really interested in gaining more access. And if I go back to the Sterling Library photo with the open door, we are very much, as a School of Management, interested in creating opportunities throughout Yale University. And so for many of our students, they are here because they have resources, new opportunities that can really help shape their career or shape their intention or what it is that they hope to do in the world within their industry. This also is an opportunity for those who have had and have shown strong leadership potential throughout their career and have demonstrated some leadership, and also feel as if they are able to now at a point really accelerate their career. And again, I think it's all about impact and ability to really expand their own capacity. So those are our students. And a good representation here is this is the new incoming class of 2021 coming from all across the United States. There are 74 students that make up the class. And to give you some high-level information about them, they are about 37 years in terms of average age range. But we do have people who are early 30s and also those who are 45 plus within the program. So there is a broader range here. We also have an average of 13 years of work experience, but again, that is a pretty broad range as well. Those who are more senior and also those who are really early rising employees and have some pretty important roles within their organizations. 36% are women working really hard at gender parity. Many are coming from all across the industries as well, and 41 with advanced degrees. So this means that while many people are here for their masters, they're also very interested in learning people from others who have already earned their maybe masters in engineering, or we have physicians in the program. So plenty of well-established, career-minded people who are also coming in with some stellar backgrounds. And also 13 citizenships are represented. So China, India, and I won't go through all of them, but all across the globe, different languages being spoken within our class. So broad range, great diversity within the class. So now I'm going to kick it over to David to chat a little bit more about the overall admissions process. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious about how this all works, and I'm sure our audience is as well.
Absolutely. So it's a fairly straightforward process, as you can see. I mean, we represent it by a straight line. So your first step is going to be to submit an application by a round deadline. So there are 3 round deadlines, as Maria mentioned. I'll repeat these in a second, but October 30th is the upcoming one. Then the next is January 30th, and then round 3 is March 30th. So submit an application by one of those round deadlines. Then after that round deadline, the admissions committee will actually meet and review applications, and then we will extend interview invitations to some applicants. After that, we have interview days, which we'll speak on in more depth, here in New Haven. And then after that, we have another round of admissions committee, and then we release our decisions. So we'll speak in a little bit more depth on some of these dates, but these are also all clearly stated on our website so that you can plan. So in terms of what actually comprises the application, we're about to talk a lot more about this, but just a quick high-level overview. So there's several components, and none of these should be particularly surprising. So we ask for a resume, there are 2 essays, 2 letters of recommendation. We require testing, so we require the GMAT, the GRE, or the executive assessment. More on that to come. We require transcripts for any undergraduate and beyond coursework that you've done. We require employer approval. There is an application fee, and then for those to whom we extend interviews, an interview is required. So as I mentioned, those deadlines are October 30th, January 30th, March 30th. The stars aligned this year where our deadlines are all really easy to remember. And as you can see, and we'll see later, all of our dates, including both interview dates and our decision release dates, are clearly articulated. So we will release decisions for round 1 by December 12th. And the later rounds, you can see those deadlines.
So now, thank you, David. Yeah. It's really helpful, I think, to really provide that overview because it is such a unique process that we go through, and our application process is that many people read each application, and there is a larger committee that is established that gets together that really takes a pretty intentional amount of time and effort to really learn more about each candidate coming through. So thank you for sharing that overview. I mentioned that our Assistant Director, Liz Fischio, is standing by for your questions, so now is a great time to start feeding them, and we'll be able to answer them throughout as we go, and we'll also leave time at the end. So we're going to jump right in. David, please tell us about the resume. I know that this is at least, I do get a lot of questions about this, specifically for those who have had extensive careers, and sometimes, minimizing that to 1 to 2 pages can be quite difficult. So can you share, more about the resume and what it is that the committee is actually looking at?
Absolutely. So I think to begin with, I'd highlight that this is a pretty important part of the application. They're all important, but I think this one is very valuable for the committee because your professional achievement and experience is a big part of what informs our read. So what it really ought to be is first of all, it should be a professional resume. So we do have a holistic review process. We look at a number of different factors, but there are many ways, like I said, that we're looking at your professional experience. So while for many of our students it might be challenging to condense that to 2 pages, you're encouraged to as much as you're able, but if you do have more research or if you've been published and need more space, you're welcome to, but really try to model it after a professional resume. We want you to include all of your work experience, so definitely don't leave any gaps. And feel free to include other things that might extend beyond just your professional experience. So you're welcome to include things that you've done that it's either volunteer work or some extracurriculars that you might have had, just to help us get a sense of who you are, both in your work, outside, who you are in your community. But this is really, this is a good snapshot for who you are to the committee before we dive deeper into some particular areas.
Yeah. I wanted to add, I really like to see resumes that are done chronologically with the dates all listed. It's really helpful for us as we're kind of identifying those transitions within your career. And we see so many resumes come through, people who have taken different appointments at another institution, but have had maybe a slight promotion, or maybe titles of roles have changed from one institution for another, and maybe you were recruited or worked closely. Maybe you were recruited from one institution for another, but also maybe you were now positioned to work and report directly to a senior level VP, CFO, CEO. And so some of those details are interesting and important for us. And so, I would encourage you to include that. This isn't meant to be all about like the tasks that you're doing, but kind of the performance that you've had and the achievements. So we're really happy to see all of those come through.
Mm-hmm. So Maria, we have slightly new essays this year. Can you tell me a little bit more about them, and is there something that makes for a good essay?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I'm going to share a little bit about some of the changes that we've made, and I'll address the, what makes for a good essay. Yeah. So I think we've had some evolution over the last few years around, what is it that we're trying to capture in essay number 1, which is the topmost. And this is about your motivation for applying, especially at this stage. For MBA, for executive programs in general, it's very different than somebody who might be interested in a full-time, which is their intention might be about making a transition into a different industry, or really just making an entry point for themselves. The MBA for Executives program typically have people who are already committed within their industry, and they might be at a later stage in their career or mid-career. And so thinking about how this can actually impact and allow you to really commit to the mission or the purpose or the intention that you have as an executive, I think is really what we're hoping to see. And so when you read that first prompt, it's really about how are you committed to the area of focus? We want to hear about that. We want to better understand how learning or deepening your knowledge of business is actually going to help to propel you forward towards your aspirations and your organizational goals as well. So I think that's the bulk of what we're hoping to do. We know that things are both personal and professional. So, if there's something really compelling that is connected to both, it's worth mentioning in that. You also only have 500 words to do this. So we understand the challenge here. We know that it's difficult. We ask that you keep it to 500 words as best possible. So certainly that would be something that we'd look out for. Did I miss anything in there? Well, just something that you would add? One
thing that I would add is just to say, so I often get asked what we're looking for in the essay, and the feedback or the advice that I give is, What we're looking for is in the questions. We're not looking for specific answers, but we would like to know the answers to the questions in those essay prompts. So as you write, just think really thoughtfully about your essay, and does it answer all those questions that we've asked? And that's challenging because it is, like Maria mentioned, 500 words. But again, there's not a specific answer that we're looking for, but those are questions that represent things that will be important for the committee to know.
Absolutely. And I love our second essay. This one is always very fun to read because we get a sense of who you are, what you're passionate about, what you stay up at night considering. And these, can be, it can be across any industry or any concept, any shocking statistic that you find. We're really interested in learning about how you're thinking about these things and actually how you might address them if you had all of the agency to do so, and how you would lead. What are your guiding principles? And so I think this is kind of a free-for-all type of an essay, but it is really fun to read, and we look forward to hearing from you and how you're thinking about some of these challenges.
Yeah. So we received a question actually about the essays, Maria. So do you feel, and what would your advice be for someone who's wondering if they could exceed the word limit for the essay, if they really feel like they need to in order to properly express their story and their narrative?
Yeah, I think that's one where you kind of have to really do some reflection and ask yourself the question, like, how much is this going to add more value to the essay, and then hedge a little bit on that. I think, are very interested in seeing ones that are around the 500 range, but if it was over to exceed like 800, 1,000 words, like I think that may not be as fair to other students who are actually following the policy of 500 words. So if we think about, keeping this consistent and thinking about equity and fairness throughout the process, we ask that you stay as close to 500 as possible. If there's something that needs to be included in your application, because we must know it as an admissions committee in order to move forward, we will talk about the additional information section in a few lines. So.
But to be clear, if your essay is 508 words, we will still read it.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yeah. So test scores. I feel like I get so many questions about which test to take, what would be, when is the timing, how long does it take to study, what's preparation like, what are the best suggestions that you have around test scores, and what are actually the policies that we have regarding tests? Yeah,
so I think that there are a number of things. So the one question that we get quite often is, do we waive test scores? And unfortunately we don't. And that's because tests for us end up being a pretty good proxy for your academic preparedness for students who may not have been in a classroom for quite some time. The good news there is that while we accept 3 tests, we do recommend the executive assessment. It's a relatively new test, but it's one that we accept. And if you're not familiar, I definitely encourage you to check out a webinar we did about a year ago with a representative from GMAC, which is the organization that delivers both the GMAT and the executive assessment. But the executive assessment is based off of the GMAT, but is really targeted with the content that it covers for executive MBAs, which means that it's a much shorter test. It really only tests you on what you need to know. So for those of you that might be thinking, well, I'm working, you might have a family, how am I meant to put in 100 hours to prepare for the GMAT? The good news is you don't have to unless you'd really like to. You can take the EA, which generally they recommend between 15 and 30 hours of study. And I definitely encourage you to check out the other webinar if you have questions. So we do need valid scores, so they need to be recent, as in within the last 5 years. We do require official test scores, but that being said, if you take it, you can take the executive assessment on the deadline. We'd recommend maybe giving it a couple of days, but it can be to us within 24 hours. And if you'd like, we can begin a read with unofficial test scores first, although we will need those official test scores. And there are a lot of different resources available to help you prepare on our website, on GMAC's website, on ETS's website. And I will mention a third time, I definitely encourage you to take a look at the executive assessment webinar that we hosted last year.
Yeah. And I just want to add a couple things in here. So more logistically, as you go into the application, it's really important also that if you plan and intend to take an EA after the submission deadline, that you list that. I think that helps the committee to better understand. And if you do, as David mentioned, decide to take the EA or any one of those tests a few days prior to that, please feel free to email MBA admissions with your unofficial test scores. I believe like as soon as you're done with the exam, they give you your scores. So those are what would be considered the unofficial scores. And for those of you who are interested in taking the GMAT or the GRE, oftentimes people decide to take one of those because either they are looking at schools that only require the GMAT, and so it's just easier for them to kind of study and take one exam. And oftentimes some people who take the GRE may take it because maybe they have aspirations to do a PhD or something, or pursue further higher education within their lifetime. So again, just wanted to give some other options as well. I took the EA at some point, so it's a great exam, and I would recommend if you are going to take that, they have practice tests online, so the preparation is really nicely set up and mirrors the actual exam quite well. And if you take the practice exam, I'm kind of doing this study, and it seems as if people, when they take the practice exam, their test score, actual test score is, and this is with the EA, is about 5 to 7 points less than what their actual practice exam was. So think about that as you're preparing and studying.
And one question that we've received on testing is on scores and what we look for. For the GMAT or the GRE, it's a little bit harder for us to necessarily give a score there, but with the EA, so the EA just briefly is a readiness indicator. So there's a benchmark that we encourage you to target, and that is about a 150, which comes out to 10 on each of the subsections. But if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, and the webinar is excellent too. It'll give you some more insight there.
Yeah.
Also, employer approval. So
yeah, so the employer approval is an important part of the application process. And what this really comes out, what this is about is time sponsorship. If you watch one of our other webinars or come to an on-campus event where we go into a lot of depth in terms of the curriculum and the timing, this program, while manageable for people who are working full-time, who may have families, is definitely a major commitment. And it's a commitment that will require your employer's support. You'll have to be here every other Friday for 22 months. And so with that, we require that you have your employer complete a brief form where they indicate that they support you for time sponsorship. Maria actually wrote a really excellent blog post recently about how you can approach your employer to begin to talk about that. And so I definitely encourage you to check that out. It's called Securing Your Employer's Buy-in. But in terms of how this actually works in the application process, it's fairly straightforward. What you'll do is once you've talked to someone in your organization, and we encourage you to start to think about that, especially if you're wanting to apply for round one, you'll indicate who the person is who can grant you that approval in your application. And then nothing happens right away. But after that first committee review, which I mentioned in the application process, once we send out interview invitations, when you sign up for an interview, within about 24 to 48 hours after that, an email is automatically sent to the person that you indicated, which asks them to approve that time sponsorship that we reference. So we will need this in order to release a decision. So definitely make sure you talk to your employer early. Give it a couple days after you sign up for your interview for it to go out. And if you have any questions, let us know. And yeah, so anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I was thinking some of the questions that I get around this are, what happens if a supervisor is changed or somebody that, within the application process. So let's say you've already this is just as an example. Let's say it's now early October. You know that the application deadline is a few weeks away, but you're going through an organizational change, and now your supervisor has changed, and so who is the person that's going to approve your time? And maybe you haven't had those conversations yet, so it can be a bit tricky. So that's an opportunity to contact one of us, have a conversation about the nuances for you. So if there's anything going on, either like that or something different that you would need to share with us ahead of time, definitely contact our offices, and we're happy to kind of walk you through what that might look like. These happen on off chances, but I did want to share that just in case anybody out there may have a similar situation.
Mm-hmm. And the only other note that I would add is for our students who are self-employed, if you are self-employed, you can grant your self-employer approval. So that is factored into the application, and you have the opportunity to answer. So related to this, there's another thing you will need to go speak, hopefully to your employer about, but letters of recommendation.
Yeah.
Maria, what can you tell us and our prospective students about that?
Yeah. I think this is a great opportunity, I think, for a non-formal 360 review in some ways. So I would encourage you to think about who your strongest advocates are, people who have been mentors, supervisors, people who have seen you develop in your leadership, and can really speak to your performance, your potential, and also have some insight into your long-term goals and aspirations and how you really can impact industry or even have an influence over your cohort here when you arrive. So very specifically, we are seeking a recommendation from your current manager or supervisor. We think that is critical to have. We believe that as part of the employer approval process, you would have had these conversations. And the reason that's important is because when you're here for those 22 months that are going to be quite challenging, even though I say that with a smile, you want to have all of your stakeholders absolutely lined up, championing you, and while you're going through a program like this. The program itself is difficult enough, also quite, I don't want to be a Debbie, I don't want to be so negative about it, but it's challenging. So you want to have all of your stakeholders really well matched up with your goals. So definitely your supervisor, manager, and then the other one can come from maybe a former supervisor. It can come from somebody you worked with, maybe at the last organization. We would stay away from asking family members to write this, especially. And then there's a fine line here, because you could work for a family-owned business, and maybe your only other person that's been your supervisor has been in a senior role to you. So that, again, please contact us if that's the case. We also colleagues can be tricky. It would have to be kind of somebody that you worked with maybe on a project that maybe was in a different department than you, that really could speak to your performance, management. Trying to think of other areas or other people, mentors.
So I have a question, and this is actually very related to the question that you brought up during employer approval. So what about for someone where they've worked with a supervisor for a very short period of time, and they feel like there might be someone else who can speak with more authority or authenticity to their performance?
That's right. That happens quite often. So in that case, what we would recommend is, again, finding somebody who can speak to those qualities that will really help for the committee to better understand who you are as a whole. And then simply in the additional information section, write a short kind of comment about your reasonings for choosing specific recommenders. I think that would probably clear that up. If you do, again, have any questions, we're happy to help. Yeah, thanks, David. So transcripts, I'll talk a little bit about transcripts. So we are seeking, so at the time of application, you can submit unofficial transcripts from degree granting institutions and any other credits that you've earned. And these can be unofficial. So this could be a scanned copy. It can be uploaded to your application quite easily. We're happy to review them at that level. Now, what happens is once you become an enrolled student, we absolutely need your official transcripts, but that's kind of next step down the road. We want all of your transcripts from degree granting institutions, so an undergraduate, graduate level courses. And we also want to make sure that for all non-English transcripts that they have been translated. I think it's pretty standard here. I wonder if there's any questions. I don't know I don't think I get too many questions about transcripts other than like which ones should I include, which I think I've covered. But do you ever get, what kind of questions do you get?
Yeah, so I often get questions about how we read transcripts and look at things like GPA and whatnot.
That's right.
And what I would say is that the committee reads transcripts very carefully with a lot of depth. We don't just glance at it for a second and look at your GPA. We really look carefully. We look at the classes that you took, we look at the course load, we look at the trajectory, we look at what are the areas that you excelled in or struggled in. And so we read very carefully. So when we get a question about GPA and how it matters, it does matter, but the committee does a very, very careful, nuanced read. And so with that will actually inform some of the suggestions that we make later when we come to that optional essay. But just know that the committee reads these very, very carefully, and we train to be able to do that, and to know, at what different point, what does this mean in the context of your larger academic journey, and what does it mean for your academic preparedness now?
Thank you. So now I think we're at a couple of those optional components here. So we've mentioned this a couple of times about the additional information. So in your application, there's a section called additional information, and this is where you can, as David said, really provide some more nuanced information about, let's say, for example, your transcripts in undergraduate may not have shown your capacity for academics at that time. And so we'd be really curious to understand what your academic experience was like in undergraduate, so you can explain that. And this is specifically if you feel like your GPA isn't what you think it would be at this stage, happy to hear more about that. And then also your selection of referees, as I mentioned earlier. And I think also one thing that I'm hearing is that oftentimes people through going through an application process like this, they're finding that they're having opportunities to transition into new roles, or something's happening within their organization. So that's also helpful to understand, and that may not be something that you've included in Essay 1 of your application. So this would be a great time to include that here. And anything else that you think would be really significant and relevant to your overall candidacy, I think this is a good time to do that. We don't have a word limit on the optional essay, and for some people, clarifying academic history or the selection of referees or changing roles, like all of those things might be happening at once. So you can really put that in like a bullet format or a different, I'm micromanaging this a little too much right now, but you could put it in paragraphs, separate paragraphs on each subject, or write an essay that kind of captures all of them. Whatever, it's up to you really. And we don't have a word limit, but we also don't expect that you're going to write over 1,000 words.
And it definitely is optional, so don't feel obliged. It's not the third essay. It's just if there are things that you feel like we need to know, to be able to get a full and accurate read of your file, this is the opportunity to add those pieces that might not fit in elsewhere that we need to know. If there's none of that, that's totally okay. So it definitely is optional.
Absolutely. And so we also have a scholarship component to our application. And can you share with us a little bit more about what we're looking for from people who apply for the scholarship, and what are the steps that you have to go through in order to have your scholarship application read? Yeah. So we get a lot of questions about scholarships and financing the program. Now I'll focus a little bit more specifically just on the mechanics. How is it that you are considered, and what might you want to do? So there's really 2 steps, and it's fairly straightforward. So in the application, there is a point where there is a quote-unquote scholarship essay. It's meant to be short, but it's an opportunity for you to articulate why it is that you feel that you either are deserving of or need a scholarship. In addition to this, we require the FAFSA of United States citizens and permanent residents. And so you may remember this from undergrad or later. So we encourage you to take a look at the FAFSA and what it requires. It should be opening soon. And to submit that early on, so that when the committee meets
to review files, that we have all the information that we need to be able to make a scholarship decision for you. And so for us, the way that we evaluate scholarships, we evaluate them on the basis of merit and of need. And so that's why we ask for both of those components. And then the only other note that I would mention is that there is a slightly different form for students who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents. If you have questions about that, please reach out to us directly and we can provide you that form.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so along the lines of scholarship and financing your executive MBA, we've been really privileged to partner with the Commonwealth Fund for the last year and ongoing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So the partnership itself is really an opportunity for clinicians who have shown a demonstrated commitment to improving health equity within their respective areas. So actually, Bob Posen has funded this fellowship, which is a fully funded MBA through our program for students who are passionate about this work and who are actively engaged in serving underrepresented, low economic, and other vulnerable populations. So this is such a fantastic opportunity, and so we have opened applications. We are receiving applications for this fellowship on October 30th, and also for the second round, which is January 30th. We are not, after that date, applications will be closed for the Posen Commonwealth Fund Fellowship. But the idea here is to really create more agents of change who are going to significantly impact disparities in healthcare. And so if any of you who are on the line have not heard of this, but you're in healthcare and you're actively and have been committed to this for your many years within your career, we would love to chat with you and provide more insight into this. If you need any other information about this, we'll be hosting a live panel on November 15th with our current fellows. And if you are a podcast subscriber, The Daily Dose, which is the Commonwealth podcast, has just featured two of our inaugural fellows, Cece Calhoun and also Crystal Yates, and Kenitha Gaines will be featured on October 18th. So those are some great opportunities to learn a little bit more about the fellows. If you'd like to learn more about the fellowship itself, we have a direct link on our website, and we also have a couple of webinars that share more insight into that. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to have a fully funded MBA that will help to propel your work in health equity forward. So David, this is, I think, the last part of the whole admissions process, and I know that you mentioned it earlier is something that you would need to be invited to. So can you share a little bit more about what interviews are about and what the admissions committee is hoping to gain from them?
Sure. I think what we are hoping to gain from the interviews is, on its most basic level, the same thing that we're trying to gain from the rest of the application, and that's a full and accurate picture of who you are. And they're definitely meant to be primarily professional, so Commonwealth dressed. But they're structured interviews where we have the opportunity to learn more about your professional experience, your personal experience, your strengths, weaknesses, things like that. Nothing particularly surprising in these interviews. Just the logistics, so they are here on campus in New Haven, and we actually list all of the dates on our website. So especially if you're applying for round one, we will endeavor to get invitations out to you as early as we can, but definitely consider blocking off your calendar now for November 15th and 16th. Start maybe scoping out tickets if you need to fly, because you will need to be here on those days if you're invited to interview. So one question that we get is about interview invitations and how that process works, and what if I don't get an interview. So just know, so we invite as many students as we are able and qualified to come interview, but there are instances where a student might apply in round one and not be invited to interview until round two. That would not represent the majority of cases, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But for us, throughout this process, as well as throughout the whole process, we strive to be transparent. And so that's why you have all these dates. Is there anything else that you'd add about the interview and the interview days and how it works?
Yeah, I think about what those days are structured like. They're very well timed and managed so that you're able to meet with both an admissions advisor and also an alum. But they're also included in that is if you're here on a day that we have a colloquium speaker series, you're able to sit in on that. We also have an opportunity to sit in on classes if you haven't. So it's another opportunity for you to get a feel of the community and get a sense of who your classmates might be at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're at the point where we're able to take a few questions.
Yeah.
And before we do that, do you have any final advice?
Yeah, so I think if there was a way for me to sum up a common theme in many of the questions that I'm asked, it's, what makes for a good application? And while academic strength and professional achievement are both important components of that, there's no magic bullet for the application. There's no perfect way to write your essay. There are things that we look for, but the biggest suggestion that I would offer is to be authentic. Our commitment to the program, to you, is that we read these applications very, very carefully and from a variety of different lenses. And so it's helpful for us to be able to get a really clear and accurate picture of who you are, both in your strengths and in your weaknesses. So while we definitely would encourage you to put your best foot forward, and that's what we'd like to see, be authentic. Tell us who you are and not just who you think we would like to see, and really help us get to know you. What about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, I really like your points because I think they speak, you wouldn't be authentic if you hadn't done like the deep reflection that you would need to. And I might be over dramatizing this a little bit, but I would say that, take the time to do some serious reflection on your motivation, as I mentioned in the essays, about the essays, and really think about what this might mean for you, for your family, for your organization, and really the legacy of having an opportunity to be a part of Yale University, Yale School of Management, and now Yale MBA for executives. Again, this is a very engaged community, and we really want to, I would just encourage you to take that time. It can be kind of, is it, oh my gosh.
Cathartic?
That's the word. Cathartic, excuse me. It happens like that sometimes. But yeah, it would be cathartic to go through that process. So we are really very excited to read your application as it comes through. And we have a few moments here to take some questions. So if there are other questions.
Yeah. So I'll field the first one. I see a couple questions here about recommended lengths for resumes, for essays. We talked about that a little bit earlier, including for the optional essay, which is noted has a 200-word maximum, and questions about if you need to go over. And I would just echo what you said earlier. These are recommendations, and so we still will read your application as long as it's reasonably close to those. But definitely think long and hard. If you need to go over one of those recommended lengths, like I said, think long and hard and understand that what we're doing is we're trying to give everyone a fair and balanced opportunity to present themselves and who they are. And so that's why we suggest those lengths. So yeah, but another great question that we have, so this, Maria, so someone asked, they noted that on the application we ask for how many years you have as a manager. And they asked, well, what if my title is not manager? What am I supposed to answer that? Can you talk a little bit more about how we look at that question and what we're looking to gain from there?
Yeah. I spoke earlier about kind of the makeup of our students who are mid-career professionals, experienced leaders, have had some leadership or have shown leadership potential. And so the way we kind of identify that is by taking a look at, are you a manager of people and for how long, and how many people have reported up to you that you've been able to give direct feedback to, or, elicited like performance reviews or 360s, and that you're managing projects. Speaking of projects, and I'm skipping around here, but to answer just this question, we're looking to see, how many years you've actually managed others, very specifically. So in your resume, if you're not managing anybody and you have no indirect reports, then we're thinking about leadership and leadership potential in terms of the scope of the projects that you're working on, or the amount of funds that you're responsible for as a good steward in the financial industry. So we're thinking about leadership in multiple ways. It's not just how many people that you've managed, but if you have managed somebody, please list that number. It's helpful for us.
And I think we have time for maybe one more question before we close. So there are a couple questions about round and timing, and so when you should apply. Generally speaking, our recommendation is to apply at the time that is right for you. And what we mean by that is apply at the time where you're going to be able to put forth the strongest possible application. So if you need to wait until round 2 or round 3 to do so, even if you've started a round 1 application already, you are welcome to apply in round 2 or round 3. If you are able to put forth a strong application in round 1 or round 2, you're encouraged to do so. Round 3 can potentially get a little bit competitive. That being said, a strong round 3 application is preferable to a rushed round 2 application. Any further advice on that subject?
Yeah, well, I wanted, one of the questions that we get is, let's say that somebody worked really hard to complete in round 1 or round 2, but now they realize that they have something that they'd like to add, or they want to wait for another recommendation, or their recommendation hasn't come in yet. What do you suggest for those candidates? Like, would they move their application to the next round, or how is that?
I think the first step in that case is come talk to us. As we mentioned earlier, we strive for transparency, and many of these questions end up being very specific to your personal situation. So there's not necessarily a blanket answer for some of these. So I'd encourage you to talk to us. Let us know the specific circumstances that you're facing, and then at that point we can try to make a recommendation about what you might want to do. Again, though, as I mentioned, there's nothing wrong with delaying if you need to, but my recommendation is come talk to us and we can help advise you.
Absolutely. So in terms of that, many of you who are here today have likely already met us or had a conversation, but if you have not been to campus or have not had a contact or a phone call with David, myself, or Liz, or Joanne, or any of our staff, please feel free to do so. We're happy to help out. And if you also haven't done a pre-assessment yet, that's a really great way to get a sense of how we're thinking about your candidacy as a whole, not as a whole actually, a brief review of your resume, and we can chat a little bit more about how you might speak to that. So I think we're at the time now. So again, I want to thank you so much for being here on your lunch break if you're on the East Coast, and early morning if you're on the West Coast. I want to thank our media services team, and thank you, Liz, for helping out with all the questions. David, you've been fun to work with today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for answering my word questions that I have to come up. But it's been great to join all of you here, and we look forward to seeing your application come through. Have a great afternoon.